Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We know everybody's busy, and we do appreciate you taking a few minutes to spend with us. My name is Chris Hart. I'm the Director of Cyber Solutions at CyLumena. I'm here today with Legacy Lanier, who's the Senior Security Consultant from our partner, SecureSky. We're going to be talking about clouds today. Clouds come in many different ways and forms, and you really can't help but be part of the cloud revolution that's happened over the last couple of years, over the last 5 or 6 years in the IT industry. It's absolutely everywhere. So today we're going to go through a little bit of a cloud overview, talking about essentially the good, the bad, the ugly of the cloud. And then we're going to give you some strategies, methods, and some models that can help you improve that posture and get a little bit better understanding of how, if you're not moving forward with cloud today, how you may be able to accelerate that process or dip your toe in, or at least become educated on what it's going to take to do that. So like I said, my name is Chris Hart. There's my mug there. I am the Director of Cyber Solutions at CyLumena. Legacy, you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So like I said, Legacy Lanier, the Senior Security Consultant here at SecureSky. Do all of the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 security enablement and assessment for our clients.
Thanks. All right, the cloud. It's absolutely everywhere. Some companies will say, yeah, I'm in the cloud, I'm not in the cloud. Those that aren't often won't even consider Office 365 cloud. It absolutely certainly is. When you look at the revenue on some of these statistics, 331 billion by 2020. Now understand, all of these numbers are mid to late last year numbers. So they're mostly third quarter numbers from last year. So it's pre-pandemic. I would argue that a vast majority of these have crept up at least by a little bit, especially when it comes to adoption and overall spend. A really important one here, small and mid-sized businesses find 40% more cost effectiveness when they employ a third-party cloud platform. I mean, 40%, that's huge. And in many cases, it's not a apples to apples ROI. Cloud's used for a ton of different things. If you look at the good, there's access everywhere. It scales quickly. And it's an accelerator to maturity. A lot of organizations will get into the cloud, not with the end of reducing their costs, but with accelerating their maturity, either from a productivity capability perspective, or even from a security perspective. There's a lot of good benefits to the cloud. It keeps itself current. It's centralized yet decentralized, and it's there, it's in a big data center. But yet it's accessible over a replicated data center that most organizations could not afford to keep an infrastructure like that alive if it was their own. And in many, many, many cases, there is a true cost savings to going to cloud. The bad part about all this is it requires a very trusted provider. You're having to give up a certain amount of control. If you're really good at what you're giving control up, this could potentially be a downside. If you're not good at what you're giving up, then this would obviously be a benefit. So giving up that control, a lot of people see it as always a negative. Sometimes it's not. The ROI of cloud, it's not as simple as take costs from this bucket and put them in this bucket. It's a very complex calculus that really takes some digging to fully understand. 5 or 6 years ago, that was really hard to do. Now it's not so difficult. There's enough use cases out there that that ROI is getting much more straightforward. And companies that come in to help you make that cloud transition, they have those models and they understand where the costs and where the spend is going to increase, where the spend is going to decrease. Another bad side of the cloud is it can be very inflexible in its application. I say this is a bad thing because it will often lead to you needing to rework some of your processes and workflows to be able to put them in the cloud. There is a little bit of a good side to this, that inflexibility in application means that you have to standardize a lot of things that you may not have standardized before. The ugly truth, cloud's great, but it's not exactly an easy button. It's constantly changing, and Wasey can tell you the AWS and the Microsoft roadshow of building cloud from the ground up over the last 6-7 years. There's new feature every single day. They both release a weekly newsletter with here are the new things that are within our cloud, and they're improvements. They're additional capability. They're security improvements. They're changes in productivity models or workload models. And understanding these and keeping track of them can really be a difficult task. You really do have to have some degree of understanding of that stuff. Cloud requires adopting a shared responsibility model. Again, this goes to that you give up a little bit control for a certain amount of capability. It means that things aren't like the way they used to be. Like I say down there on the bottom, it's just fundamentally different. It's just as secure. You can make it just as secure, but it's fundamentally different than traditional IT. That shared responsibility model looks kind of like this. And if you read the small print within all of the major cloud providers, I've got a Google one too, but I couldn't fit that one in here. But AWS, Google, Microsoft, they'll all tell you the same thing. They take security ownership for a very small portion of what they provide. There is a shared model where they will take some responsibility for of a much larger swath, but then there are still some things that are left entirely up to the customer. Depending on the type of solution you're moving into, the comparison here, infrastructure as a service versus platform as a service, software as a service, on into the function as a service or microservices. There's varying degrees of responsibility on the cloud provider side and on the customer side. Understanding this stuff and understanding the technology behind it is absolutely critical. When you look at the growth of cloud, it's just absolutely insane. Adoption, SaaS alone, 144 billion by 2020. Again, these are pre-pandemic numbers, and I can't throw a stick without hitting somebody that says that they've accelerated their SaaS and infrastructure as a service strategies because of the pandemic and the flexibility that gives them. So I would argue that these are probably pretty conservative numbers at this point, but you can see that pace. It's absolutely flying. Wasey, you're on mute, I believe.
There we go. Yeah, it wasn't letting me unmute. Sorry. Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Chris. And one of the main things to really look at here as well is the methods of which cybercrime has taken effect and hold as industries are moving to this SaaS adoption. Looking at in 2019, there was $3.5 billion worth of losses, and then just out of that 1.8 billion coming out of just BEC attacks. And you have to understand that with Microsoft 365 being one of the largest email SaaS platforms out there, that a lot of that information and those attacks are going to come directly from organizations that are using Office 365 just by the nature of using that. I'm not saying it's bad, but it just needs to be secured. So, all right.
Okay, yeah, I kind of fell into the same trap somehow. I got muted as well. So the real takeaway here, before we get into how we deal with all of that stuff, the real takeaway is you have to gain an understanding of the technology. Now, this isn't a practitioner level understanding. From a business perspective, you need a conceptual understanding of the cloud, how it works, in order to leverage those benefits and make the business improvements as well as the security improvements. You must hold your providers accountable. This is much more specific to the non-big three, if you will, with very mature SLAs and a very mature understanding of the cloud market. AWS, Azure, my Office 365, Google, they have a very good understanding, and it's not a stretch for most organizations to keep those guys accountable. They usually come to the table accountable. The smaller cloud providers, you absolutely must hold them to their commitments, both contractually and through your SLA. You need to understand where your data is located. This is critically important. Nobody's going to love your data like you love your data. You need to know what lives on your premise, what lives on your mobile workforce, and what lives in your cloud. Again, we're not looking that this must be at a hands-on practitioner level, but you need that conceptual understanding of where your data lives and how it moves through the organization.
And another thing too, as Chris mentioned earlier, is the cloud is consistently changing no matter what platform you're using. But as you're adopting these new technologies, or you're maturing your capabilities inside there, having cognizance of the depreciation and the improvements that they are making, and how that's going to affect your posture. For example, Microsoft will implement new security controls across all organizations, and they'll give you deadlines and dates of how and when they're implementing them. Some of them that will take automatic deployments, and some that you have to enable yourself. So it's key to understand what is being done and changed in those environments as they are maturing those platforms. So a little bit about SecureSky. SecureSky is a cloud security posture management, focused on the continual improvement of our clients and their and the environments they live in. We have about 20 plus years providing these services. We have in-depth expertise: Azure, O365, AWS, Google Cloud, everything else. Early adopters of PCI High Trust. We're actually some of the authors on the CIS benchmarks for Microsoft 365 and G Suite as well, and a part of the Cloud Security Alliance. So we have our fingers in a lot of places that help drive the community to secure their environments. Just a little bit about our services. We have an active protection platform that does that security, cloud security posture management and automated threat detection. Traditional security consulting, pen test, virtual CISO, Office 365 security assessments, Azure security assessments, those things. And we also provide managed detection and response services as well. So just to kind of preface everything that we're going to talk about here, SecureSky, we developed a 12 foundational security controls, some of which we're going to go through in the rest of these slides, but just wanted to kind of overlay these onto the MITRE attack framework that you see here, cyber kill chain, and where we believe that each one of these, as they currently stand, kind of map to the how the attackers are moving or trying to move and gain access into your environment. So, like I said, these are the 12 that are here. Didn't want to give too much meat on the slide for that. There's a different blog that we have, but we have mapped some of these security features from Office 365 across that cyber kill chain as well. So moving into our first polling question, how are you using MFA in your Office 365 environment today? Are you using the Azure MFA service? Are you using conditional access policies, or are you using like a third party like Okta, Auth0, or Duo, etc.? Can we move on, or do we have all the responses we need?
And here's your results.
Awesome. So the Azure MFA service is winning out. That's great.
Yep. And if you want to close that off your screen, you just hit the X in the top right-hand corner for everyone on the call.
All right. Okay, so looking at MFA. So we all know, we all talk about it. Everyone says you got to use MFA. It's the #1 way to protect against, credential theft and account compromise. But in Office 365, Microsoft 365, it's a little bit different. There's really two paths that authentication can take if you're just using Microsoft 365 or Azure AD as your identity provider. So there's modern authentication and basic authentication. Modern authentication is going to use and enforce that MFA, whereas basic authentication is going to use username and password only. So even if you have MFA set up, there are some nuances around it whenever you're using the MFA service versus conditional access policy and what have you. But there's still attack surfaces that you can utilize, or an attacker can utilize, to connect via username and password only that will effectively bypass MFA. So we're going to go through a few of those here. We have ActiveSync, RPC, porting web services. The list just goes on and on. Some of the ones that I really wanted to call out are PowerShell itself. So I use PowerShell quite a bit to administrate and secure Microsoft 365. SharePoint has its own legacy authentication or basic authentication that it can use, username and password only. AutoDiscover, REST, SMTP, MAPI, IMAP, POP3, how you actually connect to Exchange Online itself to retrieve messages. So all of these that you see here allow username and password to be used and bypass MFA. Now, like I said, there are some nuances in how everything is set up, so it may not be truly applicable to your environment. But what we recommend is that you create a default authentication policy that blocks each one of these holistically, or actually creating specific ones for those users that would require those types of connections that can't use MFA, like some of your solutions that do send emails that can't do MFA itself. But realistically, deploying this across your environment to lock down those protocols that can be used for username and password only, so that you can truly enforce MFA across your environment. Okay, so moving on to the next polling question. How are you governing your third-party application and adding connections in your Office 365 environment today? Is it a periodic administrator review? Only administrators can configure this? Is it the Microsoft Cloud App Security? Is it another third-party solution, or are you unsure? Okay, looking good. Only administrators can configure this, or some of y'all have actually adapted the Microsoft Cloud App Security. That's great. Awesome. So third-party add-ins and applications. Now, this is a very, very large topic, and it's always changing inside of Microsoft 365. So by default, all users can register and install third-party applications and add-ins. Now, I know that the syntax between applications and add-ins, or enterprise applications, Microsoft kind of blends all these together. So we kind of wanted to talk about, what does it really mean when you're looking at those different blades inside of your Azure AD environment. So applications, when you look at the registered application blade inside of Azure AD, those are actually just the blueprints for those service principles. So like I said, users can register an application. They can create this blueprint for the service principal. All users can. Whereas the service principal object, which is the actual enterprise applications blade inside of Azure AD, are the service principals, or those accounts that are created to act on behalf of those users or those applications. Defines what those apps can do, who can access, what resource access it has, permission sets, things like that. So those are the actual service principals or accounts that are taking those actions in your environment. Add-ins are a little bit different. We're looking at Outlook or Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And there's Project Visio as well, and other applications, but they're kind of bucketed in these two high-level pillars. So Outlook is actually governed inside of the Exchange admin console by that workload, whereas Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are actually governed inside of a different console, being the admin.microsoft.com. Add-ins are actually not really installed on your devices themselves. So when a user goes through Outlook and they install an add-in like Evernote or HubSpot, it's not actually installed on your your device itself. It's actually just a manifest file, which includes HTML, some CSS, JavaScript, and then there's a back-end web application that is being hosted somewhere else in a different tenant that processes all that information. So no code is actually ran locally on that device. So these things aren't going to be, caught by your EDR solutions. It's just going to be HTML and CSS that defines how that's going to look inside of that application that it's running in, if it's Outlook or Excel or PowerPoint. Whenever it's actually ran inside those applications, it's ran in a sandboxed browser. So it's, like I said, it sits outside of the application while just popping in what it actually looks like inside of that window pane or what have you, however it pops into that application. So you're stepping through this attack. We have the attackers going to develop this malicious app or add-in. They're going to send a phishing email. So take a second right here and just look at this. This looks exactly like something you might expect someone in your environment to send out, right? To say, hey, I've invited you to collaborate on this OneDrive document or the SharePoint document. And this is actually coming over as HTML because, by default now, whenever emails are viewed inside of your Outlook application, it's all done inside of HTML unless you've actually changed that to plain text. So this is what it would look like when a user is going to click that open button, right? That's when they're going to get attacked. They're going to be actually signing into Microsoft itself. So this is going to be, if you look at the URL, it's going to be login.microsoft.com. It's asking them for their credentials to make sure that they have access to that service, not specific to that application that the attacker is pushing on them. So this is all native Microsoft processes, and it works that way for malicious applications and for authorized applications. So it's very, very tricky. So we're moving into the exploitation and installation phase. Now this will be the next thing you'll see is, that application or add-in is requesting consent to do things like maintain access to your data, read your contacts, sign you in and read your profile. Looking down to the bottom one, have full access to the files that you have access to. So this kind of steps back into that service principal object that you would see in that enterprise applications blade, is that account, that service principal, is going to be the one that's taking all of these actions. It has all of this access to the data that you've given it to your emails, whatever it's actually requesting. So it's not going to, just be that the attacker has your credentials. They don't even really need your credentials anymore. You've just given them access and created an account for them to maintain and take actions on this data. So it's hard to understand in some concepts. It's hard to track, and if you don't have proper visibility set up to see this versus blocking it, there could be illicit grants that are already being taken inside your environment. So now we've moved into the user account compromise and persistence phase, right? A user has granted consent to that add-in or application. A service principal object has been created in your environment, and now they have access to not only your account, but the data you've given it access to, your emails, for example, any data that you might store inside of your calendar or things like that, whatever is in that permission scope. So it's very scary, right? We're not talking about, oh, they've got my credentials anymore. You just created an account for them, and now they're doing that stuff on behalf of you. So how do we protect against that? So for applications, you said remove the ability for users to even register applications or grant consent. So there's multiple layers to this, right? Like I said, by default, all users can register an application, but registering an application is just creating that blueprint for that service principal. They still need to go in and actually, grant connections to that data or the access that they want. Granting consent to those applications is you're also going to need to remove that. And then review and monitor. So look at the registered applications, look at those enterprise applications, and look through that list and identify anything that doesn't need to be there. If you're controlling that already, just go back through that periodically and look to see, do I really need Calendly, or do I need someone to sign into their Amazon Alexa or what have you? Like where are users using their organization account to sign into these third parties and creating these service principals in your environment, and removing those as needed. For add-ins, like I said, Outlook Outlook add-ins are actually governed in the Exchange Admin Center. So modifying the default role assignment policy so that it prevents users from being able to install those add-ins inside of Outlook. And then for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and other applications in the admin center itself at admin.microsoft.com. So modifying the user-owned app and services portion is just 2 checkboxes, just removing that ability for users to be able to install those add-ins themselves. And then, like I said, review and monitor those registered apps inside of Azure AD, and then per user review or Exchange Online PowerShell with the actual Get App commandlet. So with Outlook add-ins, you can actually use the Exchange Online PowerShell Get App commandlet to look across all of your users and identify Outlook add-ins that have been installed across all your users and identify if they need to be there or if they don't. All right, so next polling question. How are you monitoring your Office 365 environment today? Are you using the default Microsoft alert policies, or have you created custom ones? Have you deployed Sentinel, or are you using third-party solution? Okay, so it looks like it's kind of, across the board about that 30%. That's good.
So Wasey, I didn't know if you wanted to wait to the end for questions, but there are a couple in the chat section.
Okay, yeah, let's pull that out. We got time. All right, just give me 1 second. Or can you read them off for me?
Yeah, no problem. One comes in that says, how does cloud security compare to on-premises security?
So it's really going to depend on your connection type, right? If you're federating that authentication, whenever a user signs in to Office 365 services, whenever that authentication path is going to go from the user's laptop or whatever they're coming from, it's going to go ahead and hit Azure AD, and it's going to notice that you're federating that authentication from, let's say, your root domain back to your on-premise AD. So all those, most of those authentication requests are going to be passed directly back to your local AD. So there are some steps that you would need to take to enable modern authentication, blocking those protocols, some of the traditional security controls that you would do for an on-premise environment, but also identify anything that kind of sits outside of that. So let's say that you have on-prem SharePoint as well, but the majority of what your data is being hosted is now inside of SharePoint Online. So looking at that authentication path, whenever it's going to get to those resources for inside of SharePoint, identifying if you have that legacy authentication available. And then if you have the ability to mirror those between on-prem and inside of Office 365 itself, go ahead and do that, testing it to identify if there's any exclusions that do need to be made for any edge cases that you may have, like on-prem applications. It's going to be in some senses specific to how you're authenticating, if you're federating, if you're syncing, where your applications live, where your data lives. Okay. Next one.
Is there a specific type of Office 365 exploit that you most commonly see?
So most commonly, we're going to see phishing, right? It's going to be your traditional, hey, click this link and give me your credentials, right? But what we're seeing the trend move towards is what I had shown previously, and I'll just go back a few slides here, is actually doing it via this method, right? So this is a phishing email by definition. However, it's pointing to an application and granting consent. So this method does not require that I even capture credentials, because you're going to log into Microsoft itself to prove who you are to your identity provider, whether it's Azure AD or on-prem. But then when we're moving into this next section, going through the animation here, and when we're granting that consent, this is what we're seeing everything kind of move to. So the traditional, security awareness training where we have that, don't click these links, don't, download or, open up attachments from people you don't recognize. While that's great and that's needed because a lot, the majority of attacks that we're seeing, they're still using these methods because they're profitable, right? They still work. But we're seeing more advanced attackers and even some of the novice attackers moving towards this granting consent model, because it's not really easier, but it's harder to detect and prevent if across the world, right? I just told you how to mitigate them and prevent them, but a large majority of organizations don't have this implemented. They're still allowing users to grant consent to data on that their company owns. So it's this transitioning phase between traditional phishing attacks to more of this consent grant model. And was there another question?
Yep, and the last one is, what does intrusion detection look like within SecureSky? Is it comparable or built into Azure?
So from our intrusion detection, we offer, like I said, our active protection platform that has that ability to alert on those events that are happening that we're pulling out of Office 365. We're also doing some data normalization and enrichment on some of those, pulling in multiple sources so that you don't have to go to this one blade, look at this thing, identify a timestamp, go somewhere else and identify that same timestamp and hoping to correlate those items. So we're doing some of that inside of our platform as well. But when you're looking at inside of threat hunting, specifically inside of Sentinel, not only are we using the Microsoft created dashboards and alerts, and we're helping them develop them as well, but we have our own proprietary ones that we develop that we, like we said, we notice and that are trending inside of client environments, inside of what's out in the wild itself, and alerting on those and taking either automated actions or providing that information to the clients to say, this is something we noticed. It looks like it's brand new. It's potentially malicious. It's something that we wanted to make sure that you're aware of, so we can tune our policies as well as identify something that might need to be mitigated in your environment. So we're not only pulling in Azure resources, but whenever we're looking inside of Sentinel, we're also, if available, making those connections to those on-prem environments or log sources and aggregating that into one combined dashboard and alerting policies and triggering on events there. So it's kind of a blend of both, right? We can do native Azure or Office 365 as well as what is available for on-prem connectors. Any other questions?
Not at this time.
All right. Okay, so we had the results back from this polling question. So let's take a look at Office 365 monitoring. So Office 365 has this ability for you to gain visibility inside of the actions that are being taken in your environment, via the admin audit log, via sign-ins, audit logs where users are creating and granting keys and things like that, the actions that they're taking. That unified audit log is where a lot of that meat really holds, that can be used to take that information and push it into Sentinel itself, or to maybe to another application that has a connector inside of Office 365. There's a lot of information that can be gained, not only in the unified audit log, but also in those alert policies that you would create. So just looking at a few of the alert policies that that we had created inside of the Security and Compliance Center, maybe in alerting on an increase in email reporting as phishing, email forwarding rules, which are another attack technique that an attacker will have. They might not even actually forward it outside your organization. They might just forward it to a local folder inside that inbox. We have seen where attackers are just forwarding it to the RSS folders because no one's checking those, and then they're maintaining access via OWA or whatever other connection they've made, and then viewing that information inside of that folder. So this is a great place here inside the Security and Compliance Center to create these alert policies beyond just the default ones that are there based on your license type. Also retuning some of those severities, right? You might want to have at a high severity if someone is doing granting admin permissions to Exchange Online, whereas that currently is, as a default rule, is just a low severity, right? You might want to have more priority placed on that action. Just looking inside of one of the actual policies itself, the increase in email reporting as phishing, and how you would set this, right? So triggering on an alert when the volume is matched or becomes unusual, right? So if it's for this one, and we have it just set on 3 times the normal amount, so it's going to take, whenever you set these, with the anomalous activity volumes, it's going to take about a week, I think it says, to really create a baseline in your environment of what the normal activity is. And then whenever it exceeds or meets that threshold that you set, it would create an alert, right? So you want to know not only when certain things are happening individually, but whenever you see a large increase or like a 3 times increase in this, so you know that you're actively being targeted or a campaign is being hosted against your environment. And then actually triaging these alerts. So whenever you see these alerts come in, and most of these actually are from my account, I'll do most of these. I'm a pretty risky user in our own environment because I just have to be, to trigger these. But going into these alerts themselves and triaging them, setting them from active to investigating, taking actions on here, and going through the other portions of Office 365, the unified audit log, looking at sign-ins, looking at data access, and identifying, doing incident response, identifying what actions are being taken, investigating things with the user, and and maintaining or having this management structure around these alerts. I know that with the more custom policies that you set and you create to trigger on events, the more alerts you're going to have, right? So it's going to create some of that alert fatigue. So you have to do some tuning there. But essentially, if you aren't pushing beyond the default policies that are in your environment and actively pursuing these alerts, you're running blind. You want to know what your users are doing. You want to know when users are hitting roadblocks. Maybe when an attacker has someone else's credentials and they're trying to access large amounts of data that they don't have access to. You want to be able to trigger on those so that something unusual is happening and you need to go investigate it, even if it's being blocked, right? You need to go investigate that user. Here's just looking at inside of one of these alert IDs and just seeing the details, how many times it was triggered, which user it was triggered on, and who got the notifications and things like that. And then resolving, suppressing these, or notifying additional users. This kind of goes into that triaging phase. The next section, do we have any questions over Office 365 monitoring that came up at all?
Nope, you're good.
All right, so the next section we're talking about is SecureSky. So I know a lot of organizations have been looking at SecureSky. Maybe you don't know what SecureSky is, but they've been modifying what is actually encompassed in SecureSky, and they're kind of breaking it out into other sections as well, like compliance score, identity score, device scores, things like that. So this used to be like a culminating area that you could see everything, and organizations would use that to track their trending on, how their security posture is maintained. But as Microsoft is separating these out into different workloads, it's a little bit harder to address. It's not just one single pane anymore. One of the other things to look at inside of here is how you're comparing your organization against others that are inside the same vertical as yours. This takes a little while for it to actually, get visibility inside of after you set that up. But it's a needed identification model to see how you are compared against your peers. It's a great thing to look at and to monitor your progress in. So looking at SecureSky and going across the different verticals that we've had the privilege of performing these assessments or enabling features or hardening their environments, you can see the default configuration that we see in comparison with that of Microsoft's average SecureSky by that industry, and it's pretty well mapped, right? So what we're seeing does correlate, fairly well with what Microsoft considers the average secure score by that industry. This is, trending as of 4/1/2020. So what do we do for SecureScore? A lot of the checks that we have that when we're assessing an environment do have that crossover, that bleed between the improvement actions that Microsoft has for the SecureScore. So what we did is on this page, dive through one specific client inside of the healthcare provider industry and an IT services company. So this is just one client in each one of these verticals, and how they started off with the initial SecureScore and how they compared against the Microsoft average by their industry. So the next portion is looking at the automation increases, in SecureScore, and how, whenever we help them assess their environment and harden, a portion of that they wanted to or they could apply in their environment, how that jumped up their SecureScore. But there's also going to be gaps, right? So if you don't have all the licenses or third-party controls, like Cloud App Security or Azure AD Premium 2, you're going to have this gap, so you won't be able to always get 100% of your SecureScore. So for example, if you don't have Azure AD Premium 2, you're not going to be able to implement user risk policies or sign-in policies. You just don't have that ability until you move to that more advanced licensing. But what we do have are controls that sit outside of SecureScore. They're not natively mapped to an improvement action or to an arbitrary score that the Microsoft encompasses in there. So we actually sit above SecureScore as well. The difference between these two clients is that, as you can see, the healthcare provider doesn't have all applicable licenses. So they're not going to be able to get up to that pseudo, 140% sitting above SecureScore. So like I said, everything that you can do in your environment or secure it is based on that license type. All right, and then Chris, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lacey. You've seen a lot today. There's a lot about the cloud that is complicated. There's a lot that can really enable your business. If you have questions about anything that you've seen today, or perhaps you want to have someone take a look at your cloud strategy, or you need help developing that cloud strategy, or even you want to look at your spend and make sure that you've got the right license available, reach out to one of us. Our contact information's here. We'll be more than happy to set something up to talk with you. The cloud is a great tool. All of the cloud providers give you all of the technologies necessary, or a lot of the technologies necessary to improve that environment over the stock. But you need the expertise and the understanding of that environment to make that happen. And that's where we can help you. So again, thank you very much for your time. We do value it. And if you do have any other questions, please feel free to put them in chat now, or reach out to us in our contact information, and we will follow up with you directly. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.